Roman Davis with Cascade Media Group. Today, my guest is former Kansas City Police Chief and now serving as Jackson County Sheriff, Darrell Forte. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Forte. There's been a lot of stuff going on here locally. Could you please go ahead and touch on that particular subject in regards to the Kansas City Police Department issues that have been occurring?
Thank you again for having me. And I'll touch on the DOJ investigation, the much needed investigation. And most of the people that I've talked to at the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, they welcome an investigation. Like I said before, that investigation is needed. Racism is prevalent in housing, banking, sports, education, entertainment. So why would someone think that we could take an oath and all of a sudden our biases go away? So it's real in law enforcement, but it's really dangerous in law enforcement because we can take a life doing our duties.
And I definitely agree with that. And so when you discuss on different levels, the levels of the DOJ investigation, what do those particular incidents, how does that reflect when those biases aren't addressed and then it actually comes out in public light where things are getting investigated? How does that influence the community's perception of the police? And how does that damage the trust?
It further erodes trust. Anytime that we in law enforcement, and I include myself, I've been in law enforcement 37 years, so I'm part of the issue. I haven't practiced racism and all that kind of stuff, but I don't separate myself from law enforcement because from the time you start, they indoctrinate you to think like a police officer, which they should. You know, we're in a profession where you should think and behave like a professional police officer. And let me start this off too. So people, anytime you talk about race, people tend to get defensive. You know, when people see this outside of the people that really don't want to admit there's racism in law enforcement, they start labeling you. And I think that's why a lot of people in law enforcement don't want to talk about the subject. But I'm gonna tell you, it's real. When DOJ coming in, this is a chance for outsiders to identify specific issues and make recommendations on what we need to do. And if they don't, and for years I've talked about this, about racism and racial profiling. I'm a victim of it and some other things. And a lot of people are that you talk to, they're not making it up in a lot of cases. But it further erodes trust when we don't admit that we have issues. First of all, we have to admit that we have issues in law enforcement. Most of the people in law enforcement want to do a good job. They do a good job, but most is not good enough. And I've said this analogy again, how many people would fly an airline if they were bragging about 80% of the pilots could fly? So we need 100% people that treat people right, that are professional and those sorts of things. So to answer your question, we need to build trust. We need to build trust, and we can't do it alone, meaning law enforcement. And I think with a federal agency coming in, looking at some things, maybe people will pay attention now, and we can have some open and honest dialogue to start from the ground floor so we can build from there.
Okay. I definitely agree with that. And building that trust, these are talking about internal issues of racism where things become systematic and then they become a part of the police culture. And so as there have been investigations in the past where they've pointed out that there are white supremacists existing within different departments, what are the top 3 contributors that you would say to this systematic racism continuing? And, you know, from my perspective, before I started understanding how police departments work, my first understanding of police was back in slavery or just after, where police acted as slave catchers. And so many people from the community look at that as saying this is just a continuation of the same old, same old. Could you please tap on how things have actually structured from within and how the system is evolving to actually serve the people, or if it is, you know, still rooted in those same, or just the evolution of those practices in which it was founded?
I believe that groupthink mentality, people want to go along and get along and not be different and step up and say some things. I think for law enforcement, not to admit that we have a problem, because like I said before, as soon as you talk about it, people want to call you a racist or say you don't support law enforcement. Early on in my career, people said, what side are you on? I've been asked that, what side are you on? I'm on the side of doing right. I don't care, black, white, young, not so young. a lot of tenure, less tenure. It's about doing what's right. We take an oath, and we're supposed to do what's right. So and communication, you know, internally, the groupthink mentality, the lack of admitting that we have a problem, publicly admitting. People know when they're sitting around that we have issues, but they don't want to come out and make it look like the entire organization is bad. Let me think. What else? A third thing. The the lack of doing something about it. You know, even if we don't want to come out publicly and say we have an issue. What do you do internally? You know, the duty to intervene, like we have at the sheriff's office. I have a policy that you have a duty to intervene, and if you don't, you can be disciplined for that up from suspension or termination. So I think a lot of things, and a lot of it rests with us in law enforcement. I think the leaders in law enforcement. And if you look at law enforcement, it's dominated by white males. When you start talking about the Midwest, I'll just stick with the Midwest. Is white male mentality, and if you don't subscribe to some of that, sometimes it's not always bad. Don't get me wrong, but if you don't subscribe to that, you're like an outsider. Like for me, I don't go to a lot of law enforcement meetings, regional meetings, local meetings, because my meetings are on the street. Like today, I went to the 2 homicide scenes, 30th in Mungal, 25th in Hardesty, and people talk about Darrell don't go to meetings. No, it's I go to meetings on the street. It's not about sitting in the office and having lunch with somebody or a conference. You know, every month you have a meeting with people to have a conference with my peers and chiefs in law enforcement. So I think we have to not, even leaders, not getting that groupthink mentality. And I throw this out there real quick before I'm quiet for the next question. We talked about training for tolerance. 20 years ago, they sent us to training to it was a tolerance training. And I tried to avoid it as much as I could because it's not about tolerance, and that's why I'm not into that groupthink mentality. I'm not in the best practices, because best practices years ago, guess what? Water hoses, K9s released on protesters, and that was the best practices back then. They called hog tying, where you tie hands and feet together years ago until people were asphyxiated. So I'm not in the best practices. I'll look at them, but what's best for us? That's what I'm looking for.
And you bring up a very good point, and because that kind of does show that things have been changing in regards to how it started being rooted from slave catching to the system actually evolving. And so it's a continuous process, where it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it is changing things to make the system, to correct those different fallacies or those I guess, best practices, and evolving those to do what's best for people. And so when you look at trainings and different things like that, how do those interpret over into the street, and people and to actual practice? So let's say officers do attend tolerance training, but then can they really change based on a training and then put that actual to practice? Or is there some loss there? Or how does that actually translate over, if that question makes sense?
Okay, and I'll clarify the tolerance. We don't do tolerance. I don't know anybody that does tolerance anymore. But early on, that was a topic about tolerance, and to me, that was almost a negative. And then I'll share about you when you talk about de-escalation. I don't know if a lot of people remember, but when I was at Kansas City, I started the de-escalation, and I got pushback from several organized groups saying you're gonna make us cowards because this is what they taught you in the academy. 1985, when I went through 37 years ago, you ask someone once, you tell them, and then you make them. So, a lot of us, and I say because I'm still part of the law enforcement, a lot of us still subscribe to that. You ask, tell, and make instead of stepping back, and we've hurt too many people and killed too many people because we didn't step back. And de-escalation to me is stepping back, giving them space. There's no big rush. Time is our friend. But that took a long time for some people to grasp that, because we're law enforcement. I had a sergeant tell me before, you the police. That's what he said. You the police. You can do what you want to do. He came on in the 60s, and that's the mentality. So if he's training people and they not independent thinkers, guess what? They thinking in order to fit in, I can do what I want to do because I'm the police. So I've seen these things. I've seen it at Jackson County. I've seen it at Jackson County legislators. I'm trying to get a undersheriff position, and I'm the first black male at Jackson County. I've been trying to get this thing through for 3 weeks, and go back. Nobody listen to me. Go back and look at the last 3 legislative meetings, including the law enforcement committee from 2 weeks ago, and you'll see what they do. They're trying to block me because I'm trying to do some things because I need people to be able to monitor body worn cameras. You can have body worn cameras, But if you don't have anybody to monitor and those kind of things, it really doesn't mean a whole lot. So I'm trying to change some positions, and I'm getting pushback from a group, county legislators. And that, again, that just shows again that we have some problems in the county government too. And I think some of it's racism, some of it's gender bias, and some of it's age. It's a lot of things. So I'm gonna talk about those things. So go back, don't listen to me. Go back and look at the video yourself and see what's going on in Jackson County.
Okay. And next time we meet, we'll continue to try and do this monthly. But next time we meet, we'll definitely go into those specifics, so that way
Okay.
we can inform people step by step about these different things that you're pushing for and why they're important. And having cameras is one thing, but you also have to have someone who can actually operate that, and that's a salary position, maybe one or two positions. And so that also comes to the people being educated about the budgets, how money's rolling out, and actually where funds can be spent. Because the type of policing that you're trying to bring up, you start to see cities scrambling where they begin to have mental health specialists go out on particular calls. But the type of policing that you're calling for is that there are different measures, and funding and spending is going to have to go into other areas. Even when you talk about the use of different equipment, the amount of equipment that your group uses also determines the behavior that the officers will actually use. And so what you're talking about is a form of community policing that we haven't seen on any level in the United States. And that takes a lot of forethought and a lot of action. And so, especially when you're talking about dealing with the community. And so, what are some of the tenets of community policing that you feel we actually can implement, and some of the things that you are pushing for in regards to principle and how officers deal with the community? And if you like, you also could talk about how the community should react to the officers and do different things to be proactive to police themselves.
Okay, and when I refer to the community, I refer to other segments of the community because we're part of the community, and we should be. So I refer to them as other segments of the community. And some of the things I think we need to do, and we're trying to do, we have a firearms training simulator. It calls a FATS machine, firearms training simulator, where you go and actually do real time, and it looks like real scenarios with this machine. It's around you, surround sound type thing. We ordered that. Thanks to the legislature, they gave us the money for that, and that'll help us to do identify threat assessments a little better. We have to do a better job in America, not just around the Midwest. Better job of threat assessments. And I've said it before. Too many people are injured by the police for lack of proper training. So this simulator, and it'll afford the other segments of the community to come in and see what we see when we train. So I think this will be a tool to help bring us together, bridge that gap that we need to do, because we created in law enforcement, we created the problem that we're in. People don't want to hear that, but as a police chief and as sheriff, we created a lot of problems that we're trying to face now. And with a lot of incidents out there, I won't go into detail because every time I get sued, they want to bring up what I talked about on video. But a lot of incidents that I'll just mention one, George Floyd. Right. Now people are standing up and they're saying, okay, we need to do something. Some of us been screaming we need to do something 20 years ago. So now we still have some momentum, but there hasn't been a lot done. We start talking about reform. They do token things sometimes, meaning law enforcement, but I love being sheriff because I can do some things now. I can say this is what we're going to do. I like the body cameras. They've never had body cameras, those kind of things. And that's not the cure-all, because if we have a body camera and you don't trust us, you're going to say we edited the footage or we didn't give it to them in time or whatever. So we have to build that trust before we start trying to go to the next level. So that's what I'm trying to do. And it's a lot. And I'm fighting a system. I'm fighting a system internally. We have some great people at the sheriff's office. We have a few great legislators, but I'm fighting a system where they come in and saying, no, we're not going to let you do that, because some of the people and some of the groups at the sheriff's office are going to elected officials saying, we don't want to do that. And they're listening to them. They're not listening to me. And I'll give you an example. Pay raises. Some of the people at the sheriff's office went behind my back to go to legislators and say we want a pay raise. And I told them at a public meeting that that's a collective bargaining issue, and it should be discussed on collective bargaining. Someone got up after me less than 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and said, no, it's not. They voted based on what that person said. They just totally ignored me. Then later on, counsel attorneys sent something out and said, I was correct in my assessment and we need to do something different. But just fighting those things as a black male, first time in this job. So I'm trying to straighten some things out in the office and as while I'm trying to do some things out in other segments of the community. So, and I want to tell the young brothers and sisters out there, you're going to be challenged no matter where you go, no matter what label you get when you're black. There's some obstacles that we have to deal with. And I think that's some of us need to do a better job in educating some of those young and up and coming blacks to tell them what they're going to face and how to deal with some of those things. And I think part of it is exposing those that do it and not be afraid. And then me, I'm okay because I got a retirement check and I'm elected official here. So even before I got this rank as a new police officer in the academy, when they were saying your job is to go home, my statement was everybody should be able to go home, not just us. So I was a little different in the beginning. I had people come to me throughout my career and ask me what side I'm on and those kind of things. Again, I'm on the side of doing what's right, and we need more people to step up and do what's right.
Man, you see, I agree. We definitely need more people to stand up and do right. And it's not always easy to step up and do the right thing, especially when you're facing a system. And that comes with having courage and having discipline to stand in those places and stand on your principles. And that I see that in your policing. And so, and carrying that over into policy, carrying that over into the community, it makes a difference when the community is aware of the decisions that you're making, and is knowledgeable themselves. So that way we can help support you. Because at times I can imagine how you feel as if you're moving through the battle alone because you are in that position, and you're facing opposition that you see, and also invisible opposition, and also a built-in culture that naturally is going to fight against the things that you stand for. And so what we're seeing on a national level is a shortage of police officers, a shortage of sheriffs. Through all of this, how do we change things? And what solutions can we actually implement here locally, but then also that translate nationally to help the Black community police themselves to become more educated, but then to also get more officers who are willing to do the right thing and bring that additional perspective in order to change the system that currently exists?
I believe the first step is hiring the right people. I don't do a lot of recruiting. I want people to come to us because their hearts are right. And far as the stress and other things that I face, I'll throw this out there real quick. I know God has me covered. That gives me cover to do what I know needs to be done. I pray every day. I pray before I go to meetings, and I like to think a lot of things I do led by God. Some things are not, because sometimes I just do stuff on my own and it don't always turn out right. But I believe in God, and God has gotten me through a lot of things. But for his recruitment, we need people that want to serve, not people that's just looking for a job or some fun or get to drive fast and get away with some things. We need people that truly want to serve. And I think, we have to set the example. And that's why I go out in the community on a regular basis. I try to talk to people when they come up to me. I don't try to go out reaching out. When somebody come ask me questions, I say, this is what we're looking for. And so I think that's what's important, getting the right people. I'd rather run short than have the wrong people out there protecting our community.
That's valuable insight. And you brought up the same points last time. When people are concerned with contributing to the education to prison pipeline, how do we break some of those trends in education? How do we educate children earlier to understand the police, to be able to police themselves and prepare a community to be more resilient, to change the culture, to self-police, and to be an aid to the police departments?
It starts at home. When and this happened throughout my career. You go to someone's house or see them at the store, and they said, "You better be good, or the police gonna get you." building that culture when kids are young, saying, "Hey, if I'm not, behaving, the police are going to take me to jail." I've heard that so many times at the store, at a restaurant. Hey, if you don't act right, he's going to take you to jail. So we start programming some kids at an early age, and then some kids see how we treat the adults. They're there when we're talking disrespectfully on a car stop, at a traffic violation, at a disturbance. They see how we treat people, and they grow up like that, and that's what they see. So we have to do, again, law enforcement has to do a better job explaining why we do what we do. And we have to admit when something's not right. So it starts at home. We make many calls, at least when I was in Kansas City, many calls where someone can't control the 7 or 8 year old. So they have to call the police and those kind of things. So, and oftentimes it's because they weren't disciplined when they were 3 or 4, and they still doing, and they're acting out. And some people are saying, well, I can't discipline because I'll go to jail. I haven't seen anybody that has responsibly disciplined their child go to jail. I haven't seen anybody that's responding. Now you can't beat them up and be bizarre about it. But my mom disciplined. She had 5 kids, and she probably get in trouble now. But we all turned out well. But I don't believe in abuse. But you have to set some boundaries at home, because if they don't respect their own parents, they're not going to come out in the community and respect anybody else, whether it be a teacher, law enforcement, a cashier. So we have to start at home, and we can't wait for everybody else to do it. We have to raise our kids the best we can.
And you bring up the greatest point, because as something, as you consistently mention, is the self accountability piece. And so our communities, although be it their systematic racism or different things like that, it is the programming and how we actually raise our kids to be responsible, to speak up, and to have appreciation for and an understanding of law enforcement, the community, and appreciation for that. And so those are principles that we have to instill in the youth, so that way they can carry those principles over into the police department, or just in service of their community. Do you forecast in the future a change in this trend of not having enough officers? And are there anything that other departments are doing nationally to change that? What do you see in the future for police departments and law enforcement in general, to help with the national shortage, but to get quality officers in there?
I've seen what I've seen for almost 4 decades now. When I started law enforcement, we were short. When I left Kansas City, we were short. When I came to the sheriff's office, we were short. It's not an occupation that just anybody wants to do. And I said something today on social media that we see sometimes in a month what the general public will never see. Like the homicide scene I was at today, I was looking at some of the officers out there, the one on 30th in Mungal. I've seen probably 3 of them at homicides in the last probably 2 months. And I'm thinking, and they do it every day. So we're a different breed. We're no better than anybody else. But I think what would make it better, and there's a state statute now that requires every 3 to 5 years we get mental health services. And it's up to the leader of the organization to define that, because there's no funding for it. And I think that's a huge move for law enforcement, because we see and hear and do some things that other people would never have to see it, hear, and do. So, and we're human. We walk around, act like nothing bothers us and all that kind of stuff. But we got some messed up people carrying guns. We do. We got some messed up people carrying guns, and it's our job to identify them, not get rid of them if we don't need to. Get them some help. We talk about mental health and just the general population. We have issues in law enforcement, and it's our job to identify them and make sure we get them the proper help. Post care after critical incidents. That's what we do at the sheriff's office now. They didn't have that before. They just go home and you come back in 3 days. Now I want you to be okay mentally, and you don't get to decide if you're okay mentally. We have providers that do that, that give you an evaluation, and we give you as much time that we think you need to be away from work, being out in the field and those kind of things. So that's one of the things I think we can do, is make sure even when you get decent law enforcement officials, that you make sure you take care of them once you get them. It's not about just getting them in the door, because normally when we come in the door, I don't want to say we're happy, but we have a different personality. You talk to any law enforcement officer who's been in the field 3 to 5 years, and if you talk to them and they're honest, you're going to see something a little different about them. You become calloused if you don't do some other things, and if you just associate with people from work. There's a lot of things that change in us. So we need people to identify those things, and us as leaders got to do some things, have to do more things to make sure they okay as they transition out of the career. Because a lot of times when they transition, they say we have a life expectancy of 6 years on average after you leave law enforcement. That was the last study that I read, and I don't know, and that's
Wow.
a common thing. Uh, so we need to make sure we do a better job of taking care of the ones that we have. So when they snap, when you see these incidents on television where somebody's slamming someone at a birthday party,
Mm,
that wasn't the incident that is cumulative, and that just happened. That was a spark that set them off. So we got to do a better job monitoring our people, so we won't have these negative incidents in the paper and in other forms of media to make people want to join us. Who wants to join an organization when they're being accused of being abusive and all those kind of things? And
right.
DOJ, who wants to put their name on that? So we have to do a better job of policing ourselves.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And policing yourself is a part of it, but also it is big that they are making a shift to look after the mental well-being of police officers, because doing those things and just seeing 2 to 3 deaths in your line of service in shootings, that can impact you. But we also have to remember too, the community sees those. If a community sees those deaths, that rings throughout the community, and that creates a cycle of its own. And so you have essentially the police department and the community both suffering from this particular homicide and impacting the people. And so the law has changed, or there's been a statute created, but how effective can it be without funding? And then also, how effective can it actually police the community if there is no funding to approach the community and deal with their mental health issues as well?
We can do some things because we have funding post care, but not for the entire sheriff's office. Nobody at the Capitol said, okay, we're going to give you $100,000 a year for mental health wellness. We don't have that, but there's other ways that we could do some things. Making sure our provider that does the psychological evaluation before someone enters law enforcement, they have to go through a medical and a psychological profile. Just making sure those are thorough. Making sure our post incident, critical incident debriefings are thorough. So there's some other things we can do. And my thing is, whatever they give, whatever they tell us we need to do, we need to find a way. We find a way for everything else. They talk about no funding for certain things in law enforcement. We find funding when they get a lawsuit. If somebody has to pay some money out, we find funding for that. So we'll be able to find some funding, I think, to do some things that we need to do. And we give regular training on the mental health, well-being, and those sorts of things. So we'll find some funding. And it doesn't take a lot of funding. There's some other things that we can do. We have some possible free providers out there that can do some
Okay.
things for us. And it's going to take a while to get everybody through some things. And I don't want to do the minimum. We're not going to do the minimum just to say check it off. And we're still looking at some things now. When we build the new jail, we have mental health providers there. Maybe we can use those resources. There's so many different things we're talking about right now.
Right.
That we'll be able to do it. And I agree with you about the community, the shock of the community when they witness homicides or
Yeah.
had to hear about it. I've seen so many small children over the years at the bus stop while we were investigating the homicide, whether they're getting on the bus en route to school or they getting off the bus, returning home from school. So they see it, and most of the time they're callous, and they shouldn't be like that. You have grade school children that are callous. They just walk by like it's nothing because they're accustomed to it. And to me, that's trauma. That's trauma, whether we
Yeah.
realize it or not. That's not normal for kids to have to grow up like that. In some parts of town, if it happened, it would be an emergency. It would be, calls to everybody. But in our neighborhood, sometimes it's just normal. And we have to build those relationships with other segments of the community before something happens, because, whether it be civil disorder, or a homicide, we knock on the door after the fact, or we want to have meetings and have a party or a gathering in the park after the fact. We need to talk to people beforehand and build those relationships. Nobody really wants to talk to you after the things happen. So we got to build those relationships every day, every day.
Hey, you are 100% correct. I believe this is a good note for us to end on until we talk again next month. And when we come back next month, I'm gonna dive a little bit deeper into these legislative actions. So that way we can inform people about the things that are going on locally. And I'm also going to bring up some national and international things that are taking place around the world, and we can discuss how those things actually impact us here locally. So I thank you again for your time, Sheriff Forte. To the community, together we are stronger, together we make change, and together we make things better. Thanks again, Sheriff.
Program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.